Thank you so much, Louise, and hello everyone, and welcome to OTF Connects. Thank you for giving of your own special time to join us tonight. I'm absolutely delighted to see so many of you here and new participants, so welcome. And I know you'll have a very great experience tonight with Aviva Dunzinger. It's my pleasure to welcome Aviva, who will be facilitating tonight's session on Ideas for Inquiry. Aviva has facilitated a number of very effective sessions for us, and she brings many creative ideas and much experience to share with us tonight. So welcome everyone, and welcome Aviva.
Thanks, Syria, and thanks, Louise, as well, and thank you for letting me come here tonight and share on a topic that I'm certainly very passionate about. I would definitely encourage you at any point during the session to please add ideas through the chat box. I've tried to kind of work in some other sharing times as well, but it's great to hear your ideas, and I will try very hard to multitask, and as I'm talking, also be reading along with what's being said in the chat box as well. So please don't hesitate to kind of chime in with your own ideas. I do see a number of names here of people that I recognize that I know have done a lot already on this topic for tonight, so I know that they'll have a lot of their own ideas to share, and I think that's awesome that we can share together. So our topic for tonight is Ideas for Inquiry, and yeah, my name is Aviva Dunzinger, for those that I don't know here. My Twitter handle is there. I do certainly tweet quite a bit, so please feel free to mention me if you do have any questions or anything. I always love a good discussion, especially one on inquiry, and my professional blog post is listed here as well, and I do blog quite regularly usually, and a lot of the topics are actually related to inquiry and kind of what I've been experimenting with in the classroom. And I would, before I get started, really say that this has been new for me. Inquiry has been something that I've kind of started playing with in the last couple of years. Last year, especially when I taught grade 5, and then this year again in grade 1. And I've changed schools, and I've changed grades, and I've certainly changed clientele as well in terms of the needs of the students where I'm teaching. And so my approaches have changed a little bit as well too, and I am still playing around and actually learning from a large number of people that are currently sitting in this room right now. So as I said before, please jump in and share your own ideas, because I've certainly learned a lot from the people here, and I'm hoping that we can kind of add some ideas together. And my email address is here as well, and please feel free to email me if you do have any questions or anything, or if you want to engage in some more discussions on this topic. So before we get started too much, I know with the introduction, we were told a little bit about this tool, and so this is a polling tool to start, and it's just the ABC option, which I think will be changing for you, so you can choose A, B, or C. Perfect, thanks, Louise. And I just want to get an idea of the divisions that you teach in, and then I can try. Awesome. Okay, so it looks like lots of primary, a couple juniors, and some intermediates. Perfect. Excellent. Oh, and a couple people like Jamie who've done both. Thanks for adding that in the chat box, Jamie. Oh, and Yolanda too. Oh, and Monica, you kind of got a little bit of everything. Okay. Well, I know, as I said, that there are other people here that have done a lot with inquiry so far, and done it in different grades as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I actually started teaching in kindergarten. I moved to grade 1 and 1-2 Then I moved up to the junior division and grade 6 and grade 5. Grade 5 especially, where I started to play around with using inquiry. And now this year I'm back down to grade 1. And last year when I was teaching grade 5 and doing inquiry with grade 5, I was also offering prep coverage for K to 4, and I got a chance to play with inquiry in those grades as well, with the help of the homeroom teacher and us kind of working together. So with that in mind, I've tried to pull some examples in tonight's slides from the different grades, but please, as I said before, chime in with your own ideas too. So now, again with the same polling tool, I wanted to kind of get a feel for where people are with inquiry. So I know some of you have already kind of played with it, but I just want to get a feel. So please be honest, chime in, and hopefully this will help a little bit with our discussions tonight. Okay. Okay, Beatrice. Oh, excellent. Awesome. Now, Sab, when you wrote down about how would this look in an FSL classroom, are you right now just like, is it a French immersion, or is it just a French program where you're just taking the students who are just learning French core? Okay. I'm trying to think on if I follow some teachers online that have tried inquiry with French as well. So hopefully some of the ideas tonight you'll be able to kind of see the intersection, but I'm going to do a little bit of thinking because I do follow quite a few teachers online, and I'm hoping that there might be a couple that have played around with it. I know that Lisa Noble, she's Noble Knits, maybe Noble Knits or Noble Knits 2 on Twitter. I'd have to just check. I know she teaches French too, and I know she's experimenting with the new curriculum right now with a little bit of inquiry, so she might be someone where you could kind of bounce ideas off of each other as well, but hopefully you'll see some other options too tonight. Perfect. Okay. So to get us starting, first of all, especially since there seems to be a lot of people where inquiry is kind of new to them, I want to make sure that we all are thinking the same thing when it comes to some of the vocabulary and the terms associated with it. So one of the terms that kind of gets us thinking is provocations. Oh, thanks, Louise. So provocations, the whole idea with provocations is that they provide a connection to the topic, to kind of provoke thinking before we delve deeply into the inquiry. It's a nice starting point for inquiry, and the word provocation actually comes from the full day kindergarten document, and it's one that has kind of worked its way up a little bit into the different grades, especially with the new social studies document right now that kind of pushes a little more inquiry, that people are starting to look at how they can use provocations in the classroom. So, and provocations can be anything from objects to images to videos, anything to kind of provoke thinking, provoke questions, and kind of make those connections to the inquiry topic. So with that in mind, I'd love for you to use your text tool and add in the box, what provocations have you used before? And for those of you who maybe haven't used provocations yet and this is new to you, you might even want to add in if you have some ideas of some provocations that you could consider using for a topic right now. Or I like the provocation table. Now, for the person who wrote in that they always ask students, what do you see, think, and wonder? Is there something there that you try to kind of start with for seeing, thinking, and wondering to kind of provoke that thinking. Okay, so for the person who's not sure what a provocation is, I'm looking, my previous VP, Christy Curie Bishop, she writes a blog, and she was the one who kind of started me on the inquiry, kind of got me started with inquiry. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask here, not doing a very good job at it. And I'm looking at her blog because she did a really good blog post on provocations. And I'm just going to grab the name of it. It's called Connecting to Inquiry, and it's on her blog. So I'm going to type in the chat box what her blog is, and then maybe if I type it in, if I give Louise the name, maybe she could just grab the link for that blog post, since I'm working off of an iPad and a computer
No
at the same time.
problem. Give me a couple bits of information. I'll find it.
Perfect. Okay, so there's the link to the blog, her blog itself, and the post name is Connecting to Inquiry. And one of the great things about this post is she really gets people thinking about, well, first she defines what a provocation is, but also gives some ideas in terms of how you might get started with it, to at least for those people that really aren't quite sure what it is. And hopefully I see that in the midst of me trying to multitask here, that our text box has quickly expanded with lots of different ideas. So hopefully this is also helping a bit too. So as you can see, everything from videos to artifacts to just shapes or 3D figures to get people talking about them, lots of different images, stories. Stories are great ones too. I don't think I use those enough as provocations. The simple machine ones. Oh, thanks, Louise. I love the idea too of a provocation table. Oh, and a picture frame too. Thanks, Tiffany. And Christy is another person. She, as I said, she is a vice principal. She was a vice principal at my previous school, but she's a wonderful person to follow on Twitter, because she does dialogue a lot on the topic of inquiry, and she actually blogs a lot on the topic too. And her blog is a great one to follow as well. So I just threw her Twitter name into the chat box. And so she's a great one, especially if you have questions. I know she's helped me out a lot with provocations. The other one, because I know that there's a lot of intermediate teachers here too, is Joanne Corbin-Harper, who I used to teach with. She's a good friend of mine, and she teaches grade 8, and she also uses inquiry a lot too with the intermediate students. So for the intermediate teachers, I think, I know Louise is here. I think it might be Louise Robitaille. I could be wrong, and I'm probably saying the last name wrong, but and if so, I do apologize. But if it is the Louise that I'm thinking of, she also blogs a lot on inquiry as well, and she would also be a great resource. And for the people that are on Twitter, the hashtag Ontario Social Studies History Geography is one where a lot of people are also talking about using inquiry too. So all of this will hopefully give you some other ideas as we go along with where we can kind of access other resources to share ideas and get some new ones to use as well. So I'm going to move on in the slides, but please keep on adding to the chat box here with your other ideas or any questions that you may have. So now that we've kind of had a chance to share a little bit about different provocations that are used, I'm going to just share a few different ones that I've used in different grades before and hopefully open up a bit more of a discussion as well. Oh, thanks, Lise. Okay, so as we kind of talked about, a provocation is a way to help, especially when an inquiry is starting, in terms of starting that thinking and making the connection to the topic. So while we usually would say that with inquiry we want to have student interests guide our exploration, the curriculum document is also that other piece of the guide. And sometimes what we want to do is we want to kind of intersect the student interests, the curriculum document, and the expectations that we have, as well as kind of where we're hoping to go and put it together. And that's where a provocation can be helpful, because basically you're providing something that may link to both those student interests as well as the curriculum expectations, and getting them to start questioning and wondering to kind of guide their own interests too. So this is an example of a music and math provocation that I've actually kind of continued to add and change in my grade 1 classroom right now. So I met with the curriculum consultant for the arts, and what we did is the students were kind of interested in making music. I was working on the concept of non-standard measurement in math, so she kind of helped me put those two ideas together. I took a bunch of glass jars and filled them up to different levels with the water. And then I put in the container, which is maybe a little bit harder to see, a bunch of different sticks of varying sizes that could be used to hit on the glass jars. Basically, this is kind of like a makeshift xylophone. And then I added a bunch of markers of the same colors and some different wonder books. And I had actually also added in some music, like books and stuff off towards the side, which is again a little bit harder to see in this picture. But the idea was, is I got the students to start thinking a little bit about the music. And yes, the wonder books kind of are collective in this case. Each of the students also have their own wonder book. So these are ones that they can add in together. I've also got sheets of paper that they'll write on, and they also have their own wonder book that a lot of them like to use to write too. So they could kind of pick and choose in this case. So basically what they did is they could come over to the table and they kind of made some guesses on, oh, well, what's going to happen? What will the sound like as I move to the different water jugs, and how will those sounds vary depending on the ones that I pick? And are they going to sound the same if I hit them with the same sticks? What do we think? And then, you know what, I kind of wonder if I wanted to write a song using these different sounds, how could I get that song, how would I be able to actually get them to start putting that song together so that other people would be able to play the song? How would I be able to get people to write the song out? So that's where they started to look at the colors, and they thought, oh, well, maybe I could draw the pictures of the color jars. Okay, but there's 3 that are the same color. So how are you going to be able to get them to know which of those ones to tap on and which stick to tap on? So then they started to look at how they could add in some words in terms of if it was the big, the medium, or the small jar, how much water it was, if they could mix the color plus the amount of water that was in them. And they started to look at different ways that they could represent that song in writing so other people could see it, but kind of mixing the writing and the images and stuff together. And what they did is they started to actually write music that we could play, and then we kind of used this in conjunction with actual xylophones that we had, and we started to play the music and see how the music varied when we played it from these glass jars versus when we played it with the xylophone, and how that changed. So this, as I said, was one of the ones that was used in grade 1, but could easily kind of be adapted depending on the grade that you taught, connected to the idea of music and making music, which is kind of an overall expectation for the arts document, as well as when I think about math and the concept of proportional reasoning, that, oh, you know what, I wonder, like, if I was tapping between them, or how much more water does one have, or how many little things of water would I need to get into the big. So you could kind of play around with that, and how sound varies depending on the amount of water that is in each of the containers. And what we did here is something that someone else had mentioned earlier on. Someone mentioned about asking a lot of what do they see, think, and wonder. And we do lots of these kinds of charts in the classroom. And often what I'll do is I'll use a piece of chart paper, but then have the sticky notes. So we'll write some together, and we'll kind of this is a neat way to kind of, I think, add in the language component to maybe what you're doing in a different subject area, be it science, social studies, math. And so for us, I'll still have the students using familiar words and letter sounds as they sound out what they're going to be writing about, but it's based on a subject or content-specific subject area. So in this case, we wrote a couple together where they told me the ideas, and I kind of talked it out in terms of how I was going to write it. And we, you know, they gave me some of the sounds, and I wrote them down, and then I got a few students to come up and write their own, and then I left it there and kind of encouraged students to continue to add to it during our writers workshop time. So we could continue to add each day about what we saw, what we thought, what we wondered, and then we looked at how we could explore those wonders together. Now, this is another one, and I mentioned before about Christy, and she was actually the person who gave me, tweeted this link to me. And it also came to the idea of measurement, and it was matched up because I had tweeted out and said that I was looking for some examples of how I might be able to use non-standard measurement in the classroom, and maybe even some real-world examples. So that's when Christy sent me the link to this tweet. And basically what it shows, as you can see, is about half the number of people, or half a tree surrounded by people holding hands. And so what we did is we used it as the starting point for non-standard measurement. And first of all, we looked at how many people are there around that half. And then I asked the students, well, we can't see the whole tree, so how many people do you think there would be around the whole tree? So again, that got into the concept of proportional reasoning, so you kind of got the math piece. And then we started to think out loud, you know what, I wonder how does this tree compare to other trees that we might have outside? So when I asked the students that, then they started to think about, well, how could we find out? And they thought that maybe it would be worthwhile to go outside and try to explore and figure it out together. So we went outside, and then we looked for what we thought looked like the biggest tree. And again, we went around and we compared our biggest tree to the number in here, and it started to get students thinking about how they could use themselves to measure. And then we looked at other ways that they might be able to use themselves or parts of their body to measure. And when we were outside, they kind of documented the different ways that they could do the measurement there too. Oh, that's awesome, Leslie. I'm glad you used it too. And it was actually funny because there was another grade 1 class at our school, and I guess they hadn't seen this particular provocation, but had actually gone outside and measured themselves with the same tree. And surprisingly enough, they actually had the same number of people around the tree that my class did too. So it was neat to kind of compare afterwards that even though we were two different groups of grade 1s, that we were actually able to get the same number of people around our tree outside, and why that might be the case. So it's funny how we can kind of push each other's thinking as we do that too. And here you can actually see that application. So what we did is when I went outside, I took the photographs of the students when they were doing it, and then when we came back in, we were able to actually write down our tweets and stuff together, looking at comparing, okay, well, how many people around our tree compared to the tree that was tweeted, and what does that mean? So they kind of got to the idea that, yeah, it was about half as big as the other tree. So that other tree was a whole lot bigger than we thought. And yes, I think grade 1s might be a new standard measurement. Okay. So as I said, last year I did teach grade 5, and provocations can be used there as well. I do have a link that's here that I'm sure Louise will probably throw into the chat box as well. This is a link to a Pinterest pin, but what it is there was a whole bunch of different provocations I'd used to get students thinking about First Nations and some of the concepts related to the topic of First Nations for grade 5. And one of the things that I had actually blogged about last year that was a problem for me was in a grade 5 classroom versus in a primary one where I was dealing with desks instead of with tables like I currently have, is there was no place to keep storing all these provocations. So these were still really important ones to use. They still got students thinking and talking. I found the provocations, even though they were kind of a starting point for inquiry, were especially useful as time went on with my 2 students last year that had autism, because they provided that visual that seemed to help them make the links to the topics that we were looking at as time was going on. So I wanted to be able to hang on to these provocations, but my back counter was kind of getting surrounded by them, and I couldn't kind of figure out how to keep using them and having them around. So it was actually Christy who suggested that maybe I record a video where the students could go in and just watch the video to still look at the provocations, see them, be able to talk about them, but I could actually get rid of the physical items when instead of holding on to them and continuing to add new ones. And so I did, and this is the pin to the video. So you can actually see the different provocations that were there for grade 5. And what I tried to do, and you can see pins here, is I often use Pinterest to kind of hold on to the provocations so that the students, because images and videos can work really well, especially with the older students too, it was a lot easier to put those images together onto a Pinterest page. Or recently in grade 1, and I haven't used quite as many of them, I started using the query. The query was set up by Brian Aspinall, who's also on Twitter, and he set it up. It's very much like Pinterest, but it's like a Pinterest for schools. And because Brian, he's really receptive to making changes and things like that, depending on your needs. No problem, Louise. Thanks for coming. Is that he's great in terms of being able to respond and make changes versus with Pinterest where nothing's really going to change. So I would certainly suggest using the query to kind of hold on to those provocations. But what I used to do, oh, thanks, Louise, is that I would put the Pinterest page together, I would give the students the Pinterest page, and they would click on it, and then they would be able to explore the provocations together, have discussions about them. I could, write down wonders. We did some chalk talk where they would just write down their thinking after they had actually explored those provocations, and then we'd use that as the starting point for our inquiry. So these were ones for some real world math and related to the concept of probability. And again, it was Christy, whose name will probably come up a lot, who actually suggested this because I wanted to actually go into the concept of probability without playing games. I was thinking that there must be more to it than the same spinner games that we've done before. And so I was looking for how that might actually work as connected to our curriculum expectations, and Christy gave me some different ideas, and so with that, this probability Pinterest page was born. Now, Joanne Corman-Harper was another person that I mentioned, and these are some provocations she used for grade 8 history. And there's a link here to a Google Drive where she shared a ton of different ones as well. So again, if you're teaching intermediate and you're maybe starting on this unit in history, some of the ones that she shared may be useful to you or could possibly be adapted depending on the topic that you're looking at. And she's also the one who shared on grade 8 language. So she's done some different provocations for media literacy. And media literacy really works well with provocations, especially because getting at that topic of evaluating different media texts, having discussions on media texts, you can actually put some different media texts together, and then that can sort of generate some of the discussion that it can eventually lead to some reading and writing, which is exactly what happened in this particular case. So Joanne does share a lot of her stuff online too. She's also on Twitter, and I have her Twitter name in there as well. And so she's a great one to also tweet if you have questions, and especially noticing that there are a number of intermediate teachers here. Hopefully you can connect with Joanne as well, because she certainly has some neat ideas to share, and I know we'd always appreciate some good discussions on the topics too. Now, speaking of provocations, there's actually a whole ton of them listed in this Google Doc. During the ECHO conference, or BIT 14, that happened at the beginning of November, Joanne and I did a half-day session on inquiry, and this Google Doc has shared all of our resources from that. So you can actually go into here on the topic of provocations, and you can see all the different ones that are there, and then there's links to individual ones there as well. So hopefully those will provide a few different ideas too. Okay. And so after all these talks of provocations, which especially looking at the number of people that are just getting started on inquiry, provocations are a great way to just get started. If you're not really sure where to begin, with inquiry there seems to be a lot of things, at least in my experiences, that don't work or don't work right the first time, that need a lot of tweaking, but provocations seem to be ones that do work. They get students talking about the topics and talking about things that interest them. They start to generate the wonders. They get people to make real links, and because it's not just one right answer or one way, they're making links on things that are meaningful to them, and they get them excited about the topic. So if you're not really sure where to start, I definitely say a provocation is always a great place to begin. And yes, thank you so much, Amy, for sharing too. And please, if anyone else has links to share, I know I've seen some kind of passing by here, please keep adding them in, and then we can kind of collect the extra ones too, because there's lots of people here with lots of great resources. The next piece with inquiry, I think, is that after we've looked at those provocations, if we're going to actually be inquiring, we need to take those starting questions and we need to look at how we can create deeper questions. So my question to you now is, how do you get your students to ask deeper questions? Questions that are actually worth exploring. So if you could take your text tool, as some of you already have, and start adding them in, that would be great. For the person who wrote open-ended questions, how do you get your students to ask those open-ended questions? Oh, I like a question period every day. Yeah. I like that. What do you mean? Can you explain? It makes me think of the tell me more idea too. I think Heidi Suak talks about that a lot as well. I like that idea. For the person who said about research further, do you find yourself pulling the resources for them, or are you teaching them how to Google, or is it kind of like a combination of both, or do you have them go to the library? Teaching them. Thanks. Oh, Bloom's taxonomy. I like the modeling with Bloom's taxonomy. For the person who wrote about the Bloom's taxonomy, can you write down what grade you teach? I'd just be curious to know how you kind of introduced it, or maybe you can even talk about that. I don't know if there's room there or in the chat box. I'd just be curious to know how you introduced it to your students. I'm thinking especially because I love Bloom's taxonomy, but I always kind of wonder, especially with the primary students, how to introduce it. Oh yeah, Yvonne, I love the Bloom, the Q chart as well. We use that all the time. Oh, Suzanne, that's awesome. Perfect. I like the person who wrote in the introducing French immersion vocabulary beforehand. It makes me think too that even, and I think it was the comprehension and collaboration book that I read, the Inquiry Circles one, that talked about that before students can ask really good questions, they have to have some good background knowledge. So that you almost need to like immerse them in the topic, reading and writing all the time, in order to get them to think differently. Your concept of the French immersion vocabulary is the same thing, that they really need to have that before they can go deeper. Oh, grid of questions. Oh, I like that. Oh, sorry. I guess a grid, if you were explaining it, I'm like, oh, a grid, that would be good, but that is the Q chart. Sorry. Apparently I don't read quite as fast as I thought here. Oh, resource. Perfect. The Q chart, though, I do know that you can get online, and there's actually a ton of resources if you do Google it online on the Q chart, because I actually got the one that I have in the classroom now. I actually expanded it and got it laminated like at Staples, like a great big one, like a poster size one that's laminated, and then that way the students can go when we can write on it, or they can add post-it notes, and it's always kind of up with magnets, and we can just kind of move it around to use too. But there's a whole bunch of resources written on it that will give other ideas as well. Well, I like role playing. There's a great idea for oral language as well. Genuinely curious. Well, the thinking bubbles. There's some kindergarten teachers that use that a lot. I think actually Angie Harrison, who on Twitter is at TechieAnge, I don't know if she's done a blog post or not, but she had a board that has all like the little wonder bubbles, and they wrote their wonders in there. And Kristen Whitting, who is at Mrs. Whitting on Twitter, she also has one, and I think she has a blog post about it too, with her little wonder bubbles that she actually had on the bulletin board. And I think she laminated them so the kids could keep adding their own wonders to them. But I really like the idea of that. Whoever wrote down thinking bubbles reminded me of that too. So as you can see, there's lots of different ways to kind of look at getting those deeper questions. Do you think if we're going to get farther in inquiry, it makes sense to really look at how we can get students to ask these deeper questions? And so I'm just going to give some different ideas that I've been kind of playing around with. As you can see from the huge list of ideas shared, I mean, there's a ton of different ways, and actually as I was reading some of them, I'm like, oh, I wish I had actually thought of that one or to include that one. So there's lots of different ways to get at this, but one of the ways is with the disciplines of thinking. So on the front matter of the new social studies document, there's a bunch of information on the different disciplines of thinking. And what you'll see before the curriculum expectations for each grade level is there's like a little chart that it talks about the big ideas, it talks about the overall expectations, and it mentions in there the disciplines of thinking that align with the different overall expectations and big ideas. And honestly, when I started social studies at the beginning of last year, I didn't even know what the disciplines of thinking were. I thought I did well at reading the curriculum document. I read the expectations for my grade level, but I did not read enough of the front matter. So it was actually Lisa Donahue, and her name and her Twitter name is mentioned here. She blogs. I would, even though I gave an example of one of her blog posts, I'd suggest that people look at all of them. Lisa is amazing. Lisa wrote 100 Minutes, which is a fantastic resource for literacy time. Even though I've kind of played with it because of the concept of inquiry and kind of how I put the two together. Her resource is fantastic, and she's written a whole bunch of resources. They're all listed there, and she's also just an awesome person. And great educator to kind of exchange ideas with, and her blog is fantastic. This particular link talks about how she used the disciplines of thinking to get students to ask those deeper questions. Joanne Corbin-Harper does this a lot with her students, and I will admit that this year I even tried it with my grade 1s. So if you haven't looked at them yet, I think they're kind of worth looking at. Here's the example of the disciplines of thinking in grade 1. So the discipline of thinking that was related to roles and responsibilities, which is what we were looking at to start off our year, was continuity and change. That was the one that was connecting. So I told the students what continuity and change meant. And then we kind of worked together to write a question based on our social studies topic after we had looked at the provocations for that topic on that connected to continuity and change. And then I got other students to give me questions. And then what we did is from those questions, we looked at how we could reformat them to make them deeper questions, but again, looking at how they connected to that discipline. The questions themselves at least got to the thinking part for inquiry instead of just ones where we could just look up the answer and write it down. The students had to start thinking about it. And so this particular link at the bottom here will give you a bigger link to it so you can actually see it, but at least you can kind of get the idea from the image that's here as well. Now, in grade 5...
Yes, hi, Aviva. I just thought that maybe you've been talking about the concepts of disciplinary thinking, and I actually am able to put a screenshot of that chart you were talking about that's in the curriculum document. Would you like me to drop that on the screen so people can get a look at that? I'm just going to put in a clean page there. I'm going to grab my screenshot tool, so it'll be here in just a second, guys.
Awesome.
Let's find out where the box is. Here we go. And this, I did post the link for the, I think it was the main ministry page. Whoopsie. Hang on. I've got to re-grab that again. Oh, here it is. All right, that's going to just have to do. We're going to come back in here. There we go. I'm just going to make it bigger so you can actually read it. There you go, folks. So that is from the grade 1 to 6 revised curriculum document. I imagine there's a similar one in the other documents.
There is, and actually it doesn't change very much. I think the actual disciplines stay the same. It's the explanations of them that vary. So yeah, you can see here, these are all the different ones. And usually what happens, thank you so much, Louise, is usually what happens is they'll give you for the overall the discipline that's connected. Usually there's one or two. So you can kind of, knowing what your big idea is, knowing what the overall expectation is, you can choose the discipline that fits, and then you can help students generate the questions that will connect with that discipline. What's good about that is not only do they tend to lead to some deeper questions, which I think is always a bonus, so that you get some better discussions happening, you get some richer research and some richer ideas, but also if you help the students target questions to that discipline of thinking, you are most likely meeting the majority of specific expectations that follow under that overall. If not, your big idea may take you in a very different direction than the curriculum expectations, and then you're constantly trying to find a way back to it. So what's good is that this chart, underneath the chart, and I think on the pages past then, is you can actually read what each of the disciplines are. You can read some examples of questions that would fall under there, so you kind of know what kind of questions should I be trying to get the students to be gearing towards, and then that way you can use some of them as examples. When I tried it last year for the first time, and I actually did after reading Lisa's post, I tried it at the same time as Joanne. She was trying it in grade 8 with her students, and we had both actually read Lisa's post. And I wasn't honestly sure where to start, and neither was she at the time. We were kind of debating with it, and that's where Christy kind of jumped in. And she had given the idea of trying to generate a question together on those disciplines of thinking that went with the social studies content from the year before, because that was something that the students would know. And so that was kind of where we both started. We decided to pick the social studies topic from the year before that we knew they would know a lot about. We looked at the discipline of thinking, and then we created a question together that would fit that topic so that they could actually hook onto that as a way to create their own. And then what I decided to do, because I felt especially with I was working with slightly younger students than the grade 8s, and I had some different needs. I wasn't sure that all the students would be able to connect. I tried to pick some topics where I thought that they could create questions related to that discipline of thinking, but on a topic initially that wasn't social studies related, so that they would have some good background knowledge, ones that we had actually done a lot of talking about. And then from there, we can move on to creating it for that specific topic. Now, I was just kind of noticing at the same time that I think it was Monica who had put in about these images, and how images are a great way to help with creating questions and stuff too. In addition to these images, for the point of view ones, our board, and I don't know if anyone else has the same thing, our board has some stuff through their virtual library with a bunch of images as well. And I'm trying to think of the name. I'm going to try to pull it up at the same time so I can give you the name, because I'm sure that other people, I think it might be the Britannica ones, but hold on, I'm just going to try to pull it up at the exact same time, just because sometimes images will really help with generating questions. I found this year especially that I have a lot of students who are ESL, and so the topics themselves don't necessarily help the students with generating questions because they don't have the background, but if they can see some pictures or some objects, it helps. They're kind of like the provocations at the time of generating questions. It's called Image Quest, and it's Britannica Image Quest. I know our board has a license to it. I'm guessing some other boards do as well. So it's one that might be worth exploring too, in addition to the ones that I know Monica has also put down too. And thanks, Monica, and thanks, Louise, with the link too. So I think then if we could go, I don't know how we can go back to can you get us back to the presentation?
Sorry, it's actually a new slide that's created. All you have to do is, the next slide, it should be where you were.
Thanks. Okay, so this is just the example when I had said that the grade 5s had kind of picked topics where they could use the discipline of thinking, but on a topic that meant more to them. This is just an example of some of the questions they had come up with, and then we kind of segued from there to the actual social studies topic that we were working on. And then from there, in addition to using the disciplines of thinking, the challenge game is another one that I think would work well kind of regardless of grade. I know that I've used it with my grade 1s, but I started using it last year with the grade 5s. And it's a great way to kind of take the questions that students have already come up with and through the use of challenge, make those questions better. So the discussion of the challenge game to start is in the link below. My students also came up with some examples, and I think I may have that one on another slide as well, so I'll try to grab it as well from my blog on how to play challenge. It was my previous VP, Christy, who had actually come up with the idea and shared it with me, although I think it was one that was shared with her as well. Basically, the way it works is that with challenge, it's usually one person against one person or partners against partners, and somebody states a view or maybe shares a question, and the other person can only challenge them with a question. So if someone, in this particular case, we were doing it on a murder mystery. So students had come up with who they thought had committed this murder, which was actually connected to First Nations. And they'd each come up with theories. They worked in partners against other partners for their theories. One group of partners explained who they thought had done the murder. The other group asked a question to try to poke holes in the first group's perspective. And the questions kept going with other little questions coming in, and the person who was being challenged had to respond. Every response prompted another question. And those questions kind of eventually led to the ideas of, okay, making our questions better, making our theories better. And so challenge is something that can be done, as I said, in those multiple grades to hopefully help make those questions and theories better because of other questions that come to us. It's explained, as I said, in this blog post, and I think I have another one as well that I can pull to with some examples from my grade 5s on how to play the challenge game. And yeah, here it is underneath here. So, and it talks in here about how challenge helped them revise questions throughout the year, and there's some video examples of how to play challenge. And this whole post was written by my grade 5s. It was kind of a guest blog post on my professional blog, but it does give some examples that you could use if you were trying it in the classroom. It is a really kind of nice way to stimulate some debate, but without people just going, you're right and you're wrong, kind of getting them to rethink things because of those questions and getting students to reconsider their questions so that they can help change another person's point of view. So after we've kind of looked at how questions can be developed in grade 1 and grade 5, this is an example of grade 8. Again, it's Joanne's, and she shared some different questioning things that she's used in grade 8 to really get to some deeper questions. And she did a lot of different examples in grade 8. So I would certainly suggest if people are teaching those intermediate grades, this might be one to look at because I know she spent a lot of time looking at how to revise those questions to get deeper questions and then more inquiry and more thinking that came along with it. So with the questions and with the provocations, and now getting us into kind of how do we answer them, comes like I think what is the big debate when it comes to inquiry, which is how do you balance direct instruction and inquiry? So with the text tool, if people can add in some of their ideas on how they do it, that would be great. Sandy, I know the links will be with the recording that will be posted on the OTS website as well. And I think they do get emailed out to you too. Thanks. So do you, for the person that wrote based on the student need, do you find then that you're taking like little guided groups with that then? Thanks, Tessa. Oh, this is your question, okay. Perfect. The person who wrote that it's so hard to get both done in a day, can you explain a little bit more? Can you tell me a little bit more in terms of what you mean by that? I wonder how people structure their day. Like, and I don't know if this is something people want to add in this box or maybe in the chat box, but do you find when you're structuring your timetable for the day, are you allowing for like blocks of time like language and math and integration, or are you finding you're going period by period? Like in terms of scheduling the day. The three-part lesson of inquiry sounds interesting. I've never heard of that before. If you don't think I have. Period. Now, Harpreet, when you see a period, do you have your students every period of the day, or do you offer coverage for people? Coverage, okay. When you're working with the coverage for it, are you working with the teacher to do the coverage, or is the whole inquiry happening with you? No for working with the teacher? So what subject are you trying to do inquiry with in the one period? Ooh. What grade? Okay. Would there be an opportunity for you to work with other teachers to make that work? Like intersections of some different topics, or is that not a possibility? Okay, three-part lessons. And do you just get one period, or do you get 2 periods for it? Okay. It's funny that you said this pendulum swinging. I think I had the same discussion with people today on these two extremes of these pendulum and how there must be a spot somewhere in the middle where both can happen. Yeah. I think the timetabling can certainly be an issue, and certainly for those people who are working with coverage, it's a very different situation than when you have your own class. I'm going to admit that last year when I started the year with grade 5, I was trying to go period by period. I was working to the bells. I had it all labeled out, but we weren't getting anywhere on the science and social studies topics, because just as people were starting to research, the period was over. Just as they were generating questions, it was done. And I was getting frustrated, and topics were lasting forever, but they weren't lasting forever where there was like a sustained interest. They were lasting forever where it was like, oh, please let this be over. And I think we were all feeling it, and I was feeling the pressure of all these topics that weren't getting done, and I had to evaluate, and nothing was getting finished. And so with everything in mind, that's when I went back to something that I kind of wish I had started with, but actually never did, but you know, such as reflection time, which is that I went back to looking at the large blocks of time. I think that the kindergarten document may have it right, and that we really do need those large chunks of time if we want students to inquire. So I went back and I basically shuffled it so that I had half of my day as math and half of my day as literacy. I basically ignored the bells that were going every 40 to 50 minutes, and I integrated the science and social studies and even the arts that I was responsible for, which wasn't much, things into that language and math periods. And all of a sudden, when we had these bigger chunks of time, students were going deeper. And what I tried to do is I tried to keep my mini lessons focused on the language and the math concepts, and the student while also giving a little bit of vocab that they may have needed for the science or social studies, but at the same time letting them then inquire and explore those other topics too. So, and then taking guided groups, but taking those guided groups still based on those topics for those science and social studies, but with the content for science and social studies, but we would be looking at some language concepts into those small groups. This year, I'm teaching grade 1. I started a different school. I had kind of an image for what I wanted to happen, and then I had kind of the reality of where my students were at. And based on student needs, I made a few little tweaks. And that's where I think this whole concept of balance and inquiry kind of came together, because it seemed to me like it could only be initially one or the other. You know, I tried inquiry where it was, I was going to put out all these provocations, and students were going to start reading and writing and wondering, and they were going to be generating all these questions, and I was getting really excited. And I had all these opportunities I put out. I had all these places for them to write all over the classroom. I thought this was going to be great. They were just naturally going to go for it, except they didn't. And so when they didn't, that's when I had to make some changes. So this is how it happened, and this kind of goes out. And when it comes to the challenges, I think I'm gonna skip over this slide, not because I don't want people to add, but I think that there were some of these challenges that were kind of mentioned in the other one as well, and being cognizant of the time and the number of slides left. I'm going to skip over it, but if people do have some challenges in how they've solved it, I know the concept of integrated blocks for one that came up. If you have other ones that you want to add into the chat box, please do, and we can continue to kind of add those ones together. So one of the ways is we talked a little bit about guided groups, and guided reading is one of the options. So if you're trying to kind of get started, maybe the idea of putting inquiry into guided reading might be a way to add a little bit of direct instruction, but at the same time on topics of interest. Lisa Donahue writes a great post about how she did this in grade 6 and got students interested in the topic, but by introducing the concept of inquiry during her guided group. And I tried this in grade 5. So I also have a blog post here kind of explaining how I took Lisa's idea and modified it for my grade 5 students. And we actually read something from Nelson and then followed up with a YouTube video, and then students followed up with their own inquiry questions. And this was all done as part of guided reading. And small group instruction is certainly a great option. So anything where you can have small group, I think certainly helps. In this particular case, this was an inquiry that we had done that kind of involved math and measurement and science and wind energy. And what I did is, even though I had students kind of working and inquiring and problem solving on their own, myself and my EA were also kind of working with some small groups to lend support for those students that needed it. So yes, their topics and their ideas are still being driven a bit by them, but it doesn't mean that we can't support them through that small group instruction. And this is a little bit in terms of the concept of direct instruction with a post that I did this year on blending kind of the old and the new. And I say this because I had spoken earlier on what I wanted to happen and what actually did happen. My student needs were a little bit different. They were not naturally taking to reading and writing. They were not developing those questions, and I was finding pretty quickly that things were not going the way that I wanted, even though I was hoping that they would. And so with that in mind, I asked for some help. I went to some people that I knew had some background, and I said, here's what I'm finding. There has to be a way to still keep inquiry, which I believe will be good for them to develop those thinking skills, but there's some missing pieces that they need. And so that's when we kind of moved to the concept of a writer's workshop. And so what I've done is I've taken Lucy Calton's book on the writer's workshop, and I've created some mini lessons, but I've used those science and social studies provocations to get the students writing and kind of base my mini lessons on part of them. So kind of taking a little bit of a direct approach in terms of teaching some very specific skills, but at the same time on the topics that are related to science and social studies and other topics of interest for the students, and looking at what student interests are and setting up the provocations that align with some of those student interests. Okay, so now we're looking at I think one of the hardest parts when it comes to inquiry as well, which isn't just that direct instruction piece, but how do we assess it? So what are some of your formative assessment methods that you use to assess learning throughout the process? Yes. Photos, podcasts. I love podcasts. Oh, thanks. I'd love to know what people use, for FTK. For your digital portfolios, what are you using for them? Oh. So for Explain Everything, do you have like little folders that you're using as part of it? That's awesome. Okay, I totally love that idea, and we've been using Explain Everything a lot at our school because it's supported as part of our TLE project. Okay, that's fantastic. I don't know if the person who said that has a blog, but if they do, I would love if you would blog about how you do that. Oh, notability, explain everything. Sketch, I like sketch. Oh, I haven't heard of that. Idokyo. I've never heard of that one before. Edge-a-block. Wow. Have it? Oh, you don't have a blog. Google Forms. I like that Google Quick Form idea. You know what? I think that Google Form one was actually Jonathan So, who's also on Twitter, Mr. So, classroom, he teaches grade 2. He actually tweeted something the other day that he had done something with Google Forms for formative assessment as well. Oh, I'd love if someone could send me the information on how to set that up, because I've been using Explain Everything more, and this is such a good idea. I hadn't even thought of it.
I'm just going to jump in while people are still typing. We just recently had an OTF Connect session that used, it was with Shadi Yazdan, and she discussed observational assessment with Google Forms, which is basically, obviously, observing students and assessing things from the beginning. And so you guys, I'll make sure that you get the link to that session's resource page and recording too. You may find that useful.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'd like to go back and look at that one too. Okay. Wow. So it's neat to see that there's so many different ways that people have used sorry, let me start again. It's neat to see that there's so many different tools and ways that people have kind of kept track of that formative assessment, because when it comes to inquiry, that formative assessment piece, I think, is huge, because we're assessing that learning, but how we assess it is also driving where we go next. And we can't talk about assessment without looking at growing success. So this is just a screenshot of growing success, but definitely talks a lot about assessment for, as, and of learning. For me, now, the ministry document is growing success. The link that's at the bottom of the page is for my daily shoot blog post. That's one of the ways that I kind of keep track of that formative assessment. So basically every day I tweet out what's happening in the classroom, and then from there I take all those tweets and the pictures and videos and podcasts, and I give context to it by explaining it in a Storify story, and then I embed that Storify story on the daily shoot post. So then parents can see what's happening in the classroom, but as part of that, I bold at the bottom some different question links that can kind of drive those discussions at home between parents and students. So if they want to extend the discussion, they can, and I've kind of tried to give them a little bit of an idea of what they might be able to do so. And then that way, I can kind of look back when everything is all together, and that's kind of my best way of looking back at things and figure out, okay, based on where the students are at and what the students don't understand, then hopefully I can figure out, okay, where I can go next with my mini lessons and with small groups of students that I need to take. And as I said, there's certainly a Twitter option for formative assessment. And this is a professional blog post that I wrote on how I use Twitter as assessment for learning. And I think I actually did an OTS webinar last year, maybe on this very topic. But anyways, thanks. But this is just an example of one of them with the pictures and how I kind of put that piece together. So if this is something that you think you might be interested in, then the link here will give you a little more information on how that might actually work. Pic collage is another great example. Jocelyn Schmidt is a kindergarten teacher for York Region. She's awesome. There's her link to her Twitter page, and she's written a wonderful blog post that talks about how she actually gets her students involved in it, but in how they use Pic collage to document learning. And she does talk about her students as well and how they are involved in that process, as well as how she uses it. So this blog post gives lots of ideas, and yes, I totally love Jocelyn's ideas too. Even when I taught grade 5 last year, I used her ideas all the time. So, and I know that Joanne, who teaches grade 8, also uses them. So she's certainly one to look at. And as I said, she inspired the use of Pic collage, which is a nice way to put everything together. Now this is something I did last year. This was actually done by 2 students in my class. So what they did, they tweeted out the link to their Pic collage, but they put in the examples to show their learning, and then were able to tweet it out, and then I was able to see it, and they were able to share it. And this is another example. So how you can use pictures and images to put that Pic collage together and share student learning. And I found, especially when I taught grade 5, this was a neat way for them to be able to document their own learning in addition to the documentation that I was doing. And blogs are another great option for assessment, especially for that student piece of the assessment. So I use blogs to kind of reflect, and from that reflection figure out where I'm going next. Students can too. And self-reflection is one great option for that. And I often gave each of my students had their own blogs last year through our blogging platform, and I always gave the option for them to reflect on their blogs if they wanted. So this is an example from one of my grade 5s from last year, and this was done at the end of her energy unit. This was one of her self-reflections. And this is another self-reflection that was done by a different grade 5 student. So again, she kind of shared her thinking at the end of our unit. And videos are another option. It was one that I know was mentioned too. This is an example of one that was done by 2 of my grade 5 students last year as they were creating their own organ system. These 2 described the organ system that they were creating and how they were going to do so, and then I was able to get a little more information from there. Now, while I had the grade 5s with videos, my grade 1s also did videos. So this was for my combined grade 1-2 class, and this student actually explains his thinking behind 3D solids, and had done a bunch of little videos that are listed in this blog link too. And that's where everything can kind of go together. Students can record a video, but then the question is, what are you going to do with that video once it's recorded? How are you going to hold on to it for assessment? So some people might put it in a digital portfolio, which people had mentioned. Another way is to kind of house that digital portfolio, or at least a part of it, on a blog. And these were done through student blogs. And then our last little part also with assessment is, while we have lots of formative assessment, eventually, at least according to our current methods of evaluation with our province, is that we do actually have to give a mark to students. So my question is, how might you use rubrics to evaluate at the end of the inquiry process? So looking at that as more summative, what have you used before and how have you used them? And I guess my other question would be, and do you only use them with accommodating tasks, or have you ever created rubrics for the process of learning and not just accommodating tasks? I don't know. Hoping some people might be adding some ideas here. Self-evaluate. I love the self-evaluation piece too. I used to have my grade 5s do that all the time. On this, and actually what I tried to do is use the same rubric. So they would self-evaluate on the same one that I would mark them on. Thanks, Beatrice. That I would mark them on, and then parents could kind of see both at the same time. Awesome. For the person who had written here about how I collect and organize it, some of it I organize through my blog, but the majority I organize through Evernote. And what I've decided, I've played around with different options. For me, what seems to work is I have notebooks for each subject area, and then I take photographs or put in links to the video stuff for each of the students under the subject area. And then really what it is it's proof for people that want the proof. I know because I've spent so much time sitting and talking to the students where they're at. I always find that by the time I go to write the report card, I honestly don't need to look back, because when I started using inquiry, I find that all I'm doing is sitting and talking to kids. So I really know where they're at, but I need that proof piece. And so the proof piece is in those Evernote books, and then I can look back, and then I have specific Evernote books for students, just for my students who are kind of struggling, so that it's easier to share with their parents. And hold on. Hold on. Where I find the storage space is I actually find that I'm assuming the where do I find the storage space was meant for me, but I'm not sure, because I'm having a problem here scrolling down on some of them here. Yes. Okay. I paid for the additional Evernote so that I can actually add. I pay the $50 or whatever for the year for it. But our board right now actually has Google Apps for Ed, and we have unlimited storage on Google Apps. And so in all honesty, if I were going to do it again, I think I would just set up folders through my Google account, and then I could do it all for free. But now I have everything through Evernote, so I'll probably continue with Evernote until the end of this year, and then look at Google Apps for the following year. Thinking knowledge. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. And yes, I do think using that helps, especially because remembering that we are evaluating those overall expectations, that picking from those different levels of the achievement chart and then looking at the overall expectations certainly seems to help. Okay. So the only other thing that I'm going to add in here is I have, and this kind of overlaps with assessment evaluation activities. It's a blog post by Christy, and it just looks at the idea of maybe rethinking a culminating task, because often when we're looking at rubrics, we're looking at that final big task, and she gives us some ideas on how you can actually look at evaluating the process. And some people here spoke about even having rubrics